After the release of Sonic Frontiers, Sonic Team made efforts to go back and update the game throughout the following year. Now, this gave us a jukebox, a camera mode, and other neat stuff which we'll get into later, but none have been as significant as update number 3. What this update has in store for Frontiers is huge, and I want to talk about it because it doesn't just completely change the gameplay, but it also completely revamps the story of the game, which is something I've genuinely never seen before. So in today's video, I'm going to be covering not just update number 3, but every single update that's come out so far, and of course this includes the Final Horizon update, with all of its new changes to the gameplay, to the story, and just to see how this final update changes everything for Sonic Frontiers. After initially revealing Sonic Frontiers in all of its glory to the public, the fans soon saw the first update we got to the game a few short months after its release. This update brought many new features and modes, and to start off, we have the Jukebox mode, which is pretty self-explanatory as it comes with a bunch of bangers from past Sonic games, and overall comes with a good selection of tracks. Next up in the first update, we also got introduced into the photo mode, which is something that most 3D open world games like Insomniac's Spider-Man games or The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, for example, have. And although personally I wouldn't find myself using it, it's for sure a welcome addition nonetheless. Following the photo mode, there were also the introduction of some challenge modes. These reside in two modes being Cyberspace Challenge and Battle Rush. Cyberspace Challenge is trying to beat a lot of Cyberspace levels in a quick succession and as fast as possible. As for Battle Rush, it's a timed combat mode where you need to defeat any number of enemies the game throws at you within the given amount of time. These enemies can go from regular enemies to Guardians to even the Titans. I don't really have a lot to say as I'm not a big fan of this mode or just cyberspace in general, and nor do I really care for it, but it's still a pretty cool addition. And other than some small quality of life changes, this first update does a great job at introducing a bunch of new features which can't really be complained about. Solid 7 iced out Eggmans out of 10. Wait, what? Following update 1, another few short months would follow before the celebration of Sonic's birthday, where a slightly bigger update would be released with a bunch of new content. Starting off, this update would introduce New Game Plus, where, as it sounds, completing the game would allow you to transfer all of Sonic's stats into a new game save file, or if you're feeling ballsy, you can also choose to play the extreme difficulty. This is a mode which doesn't transfer Sonic's stats, but it's there nonetheless. Now, this wasn't a mode that intrigued me by any means, but there was no way I could go through Frontiers all over again right after beating it. Next up comes Sonic's birthday content, which came with a lot of neat things that celebrated the blue blur for his anniversary. Some things introduced include new outfits for not only Sonic, but also his friends, as well as the Coco, but also cosmetics for the islands themselves, which is pretty cool to change up the map entirely. But I'm not gonna lie to you, it is a bit distracting because this UI is very in your face. Now, other than some small additions from the second update, brand new Coco, and a few new time challenges for the open zone map, the main memorable thing was the reintroduction of the Spin Dash. When I first heard about it, I was expecting something akin to the adventure titles, but that is not at all what we got. The Spin Dash is more similar to the one last seen in 2013's Sonic Lost World. Although it can be a lot of fun to use, it feels very similar to a second option for the boost, and while yes, it can have other uses like for combat, it's still a second boost option in a way that kind of makes it feel redundant, but it's still a welcome addition regardless. For this update, I'd have to give it a solid 8 out of 10 iced out Eggmans. Not only does it introduce a bunch of new content, but it reintroduces the Spin Dash, an iconic move from Sonic's past games. So yes, absolutely, I love what I see in this update. Now, with the previous two updates being fully covered, what we're going to be talking about is the biggest update I think there's ever been for a mainline Sonic game. Like, ever. Update number 3 brings out so much new content. I mean, new story, new challenges, and yes, even new characters. So let's go ahead and talk about the first thing we've listed off, which is the story mode. Also, one other thing that we should get out of the way is that this new update essentially makes Sonic run to a better ending for the game, which I think is pretty funny. When booting up a save file nearing the completion of the original campaign mode, a new ring portal will show up which allows Sonic to jump through, and this will allow you to experience everything Sonic Frontiers should have been from the get-go. Now, from this point forward, look at everything coming up as a replacement for what the original ending of the game should have looked like. Because while initially I thought this was something to put more lore into the story, it's actually basically something entirely new that definitely has a lot more thought put out into it. Sonic gets stopped by Dr. Eggman and Sage shortly after landing on Ouranos Island. Sage proposes an alternate, riskier strategy than the one we're familiar with, in which Sonic's friends actually assist in collecting the Chaos Emerald, while Sonic goes on to take on the Trial of the Masters to transform his own cyber corruption into a new power. Sonic and his friends put Sage's plan into action. After Sage, in a way, brings back Tails, Knuckles, and Amy, the hunt begins. And as the story progresses, Sonic's friends will go on out and find and collect each of the Chaos Emeralds, with Eggman down the road revealing to have found the 7th. While this is happening, Sonic is busy taking on the Trial of the Masters. Once all of this is done and Sonic completes every trial, Sonic heads on to take on the Supreme. After getting all the emeralds, he turns into Super Sonic, defeating him. And what changed this time is that Sonic needs to deal with the End a lot sooner. No longer being a Galaga fight, rather the End uses the Supreme's body as a host to fight Sonic. The end combining itself with Supreme proves to be too much for Sonic and forces him to resort to his new cyber power, unlocking the true potential of Super Sonic, having more effects on the Golden Hero and even changing his eye color to a bright cyan. When this new form first appeared, I immediately got excited because I thought of Dragon Ball Z and the form in the show known as Super Saiyan 2. This new form, although not having a specific name nor drastically having a big visual change on Sonic, is similar to Super Saiyan 2 in a way. Like the form before it, Super Saiyan is already a natural power boost, with Super Saiyan 2 being known to essentially just increase the already powerful Super Saiyan transformation. What most Dragon Ball fans recognize Super Saiyan 2 for, though, can mainly be known for the spikier hair and having electricity sparks surging all around. This new form of Sonic has 1, a small noticeable change around him visually, and 2, the electric sparks surging around him. So in my headcanon, this is Super Sonic 2. They've already ripped off Dragon Ball Z, might as well go all the way. Sonic, using his newly unlocked form, is able to defeat the End by doing the one thing the Master King has told him not to do, and go all out, as it might kill him in the process. Of course, Sonic goes all out and doesn't die. Who could have predicted that one? And although it's only viewable for a few seconds, you can actually view what Sonic looks like with a full cyber power corruption powering him. And honestly, with those teeth, I'm heavily reminded of the Super Sonic from the Fleetway comics, which is kind of cool if they used that as an inspiration. After this whole sequence, however, most of the ending is relatively the same, with Sonic and his friends living on a tornado, and when it pans back to Eggman, Sage doesn't need to fake die and just heads home. Now, overall, the main takeaway for me on this update was giving Frontiers the ending it deserved, because a lot of people were complaining about the original ending. I mean, that includes myself. I mean, what was that Galaga fight? What was that? There was no way that Sonic Team was going to allow such an amazing game to end on such a bad note. And although the story itself is just fine in general, I mean, there's nothing crazy or notable, but honestly, with this new form, new ending, I think that this is the ending that it should have had from release. And although it's nice to have now, it's a bit embarrassing that we literally got a better written ending almost a year after the game's release. Now, heading into the territory of gameplay, the coolest thing I can immediately say is that after almost a decade, more playable characters are finally in a Sonic game, and they're not a version of Sonic. Amy, Tails, and Knuckles all become new playable characters that you can actually play and explore the Starfall Islands with. It's still crazy to think that the last time these three were playable in a 3D Sonic game was in Sonic 06, and that was 17 years ago. So let's take a moment to analyze what new abilities come with these guys. And well, gal in this case. Starting off with Amy, she becomes the first new character you take control of. Her moveset is very akin to Sonic, with having a few new additions. She has the ability to boost, spin dash, homing attack, and Psyloop. Where her abilities come into play though is seen with her Tourette cards, which by the way, I have no clue where this comes from because I thought the whole card stick was just a thing for a Sonic Origins cutscene. But I guess not? Other than her cards being used for attacking, Amy also has this ability to glide with her cards, which reminded me of how Toadette played with the Super Crown in Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe, and having the ability to jump and glide. She's good for platforming, but honestly she's not my favorite character to play. Next up is Knuckles, who, like Amy and Sonic, have the ability to perform a boost, homing attack, spin dash, and Psyloop. Knuckles' combat also has him punching head-on and having drill-like attacks, which is pretty much what the Echidna is known for, so that works out perfectly. When it comes to his abilities, as shown in previous titles, Knuckles has the return of his gliding, and some issues immediately start with Knuckles, for example. I'm not really a big fan of how extra these animations are. They really ruin the pace of gameplay for me, and they sometimes even mess me up when I'm trying to glide back to where I was before. The next returning ability from Knuckles is his climbing. However, for climbing, there are only specific walls and structures that Knuckles can actually latch onto. Knuckles also has a more unique way that he deals with combat. As previously stated, he punches enemies head on, and this can result with a lot of his combat attacks having punching, drilling, and fire-based attacks. This honestly for me made the combat a little bit better because honestly, Knuckles is one of the coolest characters and I've always loved him, and so seeing him finally having a punching slash combat type of gameplay is just really great to see. Lastly is Sonic's best friend, Miles Tails Prower. Tails, like the other three characters, has the ability to also spin dash, boost, and Psyloop, but for whatever reason is singled out and lacks the ability to homing attack. Now, while normally I'd have an issue with this, if anything, Tails has the most amount of abilities added to his character. Starting off, of course, is Tails' iconic flight, which returns, but it's used more like a glide, where he propels himself up a bit and stays at that same altitude until he's worn out. One thing that genuinely bothers me though is how every character has a hover-like ability, which just doesn't work for me because they feel like copies of one another or not really feeling that original. Like, Knuckles and Tails can be excused, but why does Amy have this randomly new ability to hover which has never been seen before in the franchise?
It is of no concern.
But back to Tails, one of the coolest thing ever is if you boost in the air, Tails summons his mech from Sonic Adventure 2, which is an amazing callback. My only nitpick though is that it's in its land form when it's been shown in the past to have a flying mode. The mech can also be used for combat for Tails to shoot down enemies. Also, instead of a homing attack, Tails also can just fling wrenches at his enemies, which is actually pretty cool. Overall, it's amazing to see the reintroduction of multiple playable characters in a 3D Sonic game again after so long. And genuinely, I hope this is something that continues in future titles because they did an excellent job with this update. Following the playable characters are the update to Cyberspace. Some Cyberspace levels have new objectives like collecting flickies or some moon medals, which is kinda cool. One thing though is that I already found myself not really enjoying Cyberspace levels all that much, so having a collectathon be the new objective for some of these stages wasn't really my cup of tea, and if anything, actually made me avoid Cyberspace stages even more. Next up, another big major thing that was added was the trial towers, and the trials that came with them, of course. These towers are huge structures like that of Rhea Island, and you had to platform your way all the way to the top to take on the trial. There are 5 trial towers in total, and although they were okay for me for the most part, the second trial tower was just annoying to go through because of how many times I fell down, but I can't really complain too much because that's just my fault. I'm just bad at video games. It's in my nature. One small issue I'm going to mention with the trial towers though is that I wasn't really a big fan of how there were specific structures needed to basically climb up the tower that don't respawn if you fell down like I did. So it was extremely tedious to retread those same steps in the case that you were to fall down. As for the trials themselves, they were really just easy combat challenges, even on the hard mode. And honestly, I didn't see why the trial couldn't just be a cutscene if this is all they were. But honestly, it's fine. It's fine. Most of the trials for the most part are pretty similar, except for the final trial, which was a boss rush of all the titans up to this point in the game, where you had to beat them all at once with a perfect parry. And I kind of find it funny how the so-called perfect parry is just a regular designed one and not one you can just cheese the fuck out of. When it comes to the final boss, the Supreme itself will actually be exactly the same for the first part, but what changes is after the end takes over the Supreme's body, and this is where Super Sonic 2 takes over. The only difference in Super Sonic 2's gameplay though is that his counter animation is fucking awesome. I mean, dude, look at this. Full on Dragon Ball Z vibes. One of my favorite games is Dragon Ball Z Kakarot, and I have the exact same feeling when I look at this and compare it to this. For this boss, you are going to want to focus on the purple tube thing attached to the Supreme's head, as that basically heals its HP all the way up. And once you get it detached, that's when you can go all out and defeat the boss for good. Honestly, this is the best thing that could have happened for Frontiers, because nobody liked that Galaga-ass final boss. So with the ending of Frontiers being basically rewritten, it does so much good for this title. But going past all these issues I dealt with in this update, overall, the welcome new additions made Frontiers only better, again, for the most part, and a lot more enjoyable from my own experience. Regardless, this is still an amazing update and I had a fantastic time playing through it. Seeing this as the final update for Sonic Frontiers, I do truly believe that they fixed what Frontiers was lacking from in the initial release. Going from the expanded story to the return of iconic characters being playable again and introducing many new features and gimmicks after the fact, Sonic Frontiers proves it's one of the Blue Blur's best titles up to date and one that's definitely worth going through. Hey, and welcome to the end of the video. Socials to my Twitter, Twitch, and Discord will be in the description down below if that interests you. Of course, as always, huge thank you to all of my channel members, as you guys are awesome, and thank you for even giving me a dime. If you guys want to have your name be at the end of videos, go ahead and press that join button right next to the subscribe button, which you should totally also press, because guess what? It's free, and if you regret it for whatever reason, you can always unsubscribe later. Thank you all so much for watching, and have a good one.